With the arrival of winter's low, dark sky, communities around the world look to the miracle of light as a sign of rebirth and a source of hope. Each Sunday during December, this time of winter's arrival and darkening skies, we at UUUC acknowledge the turning of the seasons and the coming of new life and the return of light, and recommit ourselves to the protection of everyone's right to his or her own radiant humanity. Our first candle symbolized hope and expectation. Today, we light the second candle as a symbol of joy. Not just any simple cheer, but the experience of joy that cannot be contained. Advent asks us to proclaim our gladness as a gift to the world, even when sorrow and uncertainty abound. May we share our hearts through our words, our music, and the way we live our lives. Let the fullness of our joy lead to more freedom. Good morning. Good morning on this Sunday as the darker days approach for the winter solstice. We are so glad that you are here. I wish we could be here together. I'm Martha Sinkula, I'm your service leader. Welcome to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist Congregation. Our speaker today is Dennis Reynolds. He will be available for after Zoom sermon discussion. Every Sunday, check-in begins at 11:15 and with 11:30 conversation. As we continue to meet through recorded services, I know how many of us are missing the beloved community of in-person services. It's important to make every effort to stay connected with one another during this physical separation. Please call and check with others, check in with other members of our congregation. If you're using YouTube, help others who might find it difficult to do so in order that many of us as possible can participate. If you want to participate in our after-service discussions and haven't used Zoom, just Google the Zoom to download the app and follow the easy prompts. Once you've done that and signed up for a free Zoom account, click on the link in your email that Michael sends out every week on usually Saturday evenings. And if you miss the after-service discussion, they are recorded just like our services, so you can view them anytime on YouTube. Services are generally uploaded, as I said, on Saturday nights. Otherwise, these discussions are recorded so you can view them anytime, just like our services. So if you're on YouTube, just subscribe. Click on that button. That way you'll get a signal that you have a new episode that is available. In addition to services and discussions, we also have meditations and interviews. There's a lot to check out. Also, for those of us who are having trouble hearing, there is a closed caption button. Click on that. It's found at the bottom of the screen next to the settings. Captions will appear so you can understand what is being said. We thank Michael Wheeler and Lucy Swangham for their work on producing these videos of our services each week. Thank you so much for such a good job done. Reverend Dennis Reynolds came to the ministry after a 30-year career as a preschool teacher and an administrator at the University of Oregon. He has since retired to Eugene after serving churches in Oregon, Washington State, and he was there as a hospital chaplain. He has been activist locally and globally and he believes that the most powerful sermons are those written with a religious text in one hand and a current news source in the other. He enjoys lifelong learning and the practice of crafting sermons.
The words of our chalice lighting are gifts from the Canadian Unitarian minister, Reverend Deborah Falk. I've had the good fortune to know Deborah for many years. We met decades ago at a Unitarian Universalist church camp in the Puget Sound area of Seattle before either one of us had answered the call to ministry. Deborah wrote, "A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith.
A faith built on the foundation of freedom, reason, and tolerance.
A faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice.
A faith that visions a world flourishing with equality for all her people.
A faith that demands the living out of goodness.
A faith that requires thoughtfulness.
A faith of wholeness.
May this tiny flame be a symbol of the spark of all of us within each of us."
I invite you now to join in a time of shared meditation. Sit in a way that is comfortable for you. I suggest you might consider feet on the floor and back as straight as is comfortable to allow the breath to flow. I'll begin with some words, then we will move into a time of shared silence, and the silence will end in song. Our words are from Mary Oliver, who wrote the following prose poem. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty and lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibilities left. Perhaps that this is a way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches and power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you noticed it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb. Don't hesitate. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
It's easy to forget how the world is wide. Joy is calling, Joy is calling, let it in. Oh, joy abides like a river underground, waiting for you to let your bucket down. Just remember it's with us all around. Joy is calling, let it in. Oh, joy abides like a river underground, waiting for you to let your bucket down. Just remember it's with us all around. Joy is calling, let it in. Oh, joy abides like a river underground, waiting for you to let your bucket down. Just remember it's with us all around. Joy is calling, let it in. Yeah.
Our reading of Joy is by the poet and essayist David Whyte.
Joy is a meeting place of deep intentionality and of self-forgetting, the body alchemy of what lies inside us, in communion with that formerly seemed outside, but is now neither, that becomes a living frontier, a voice speaking between us and the world, dance, laughter, affection, skin touching skin, singing in the car, music in the street, the quiet, irreplaceable, and companionable presence of a daughter, the sheer intoxicating beauty of the world inhabited as an edge between what we previously thought was us and what we thought was other than us.
Joy may be made by practice, hard-won achievement, as much as by an unlooked-for passing act of grace arriving out of nowhere. Joy is a measure of our relationship not only to life, but to death and our living with death. Joy is an act of giving ourselves away before we need to or are asked to. Joy is practiced generosity. If joy is a deep form of love, it is also the raw engagement with the passing seasonality of existence, the fleeting presence of those we love understood as gift. Going in and out of our lives, faces, voices, memory, aroma of the first spring day or a wood fire in winter. The last breath of a dying parent as they create a rare, raw, beautiful frontier between loving presence and a new and now blossoming absence.
To feel a full and untrammeled joy is to have become fully generous. To allow ourselves to be joyful is to have walked through the doorway of fear, the dropping away of the anxious, worried self. Felt like a thankful death itself, a disappearance, a giving away, overheard in the laughter of the friendship. The vulnerability of happiness felt suddenly as a strength, a solace and a source. The claiming of our place in the living conversation. The sheer privilege of being in the presence of the ocean. The sense of having danced to the music, in the rain, under the sky, or with a well-loved familiar face. I was here, and you were here, and together we made a world. Now, I would like to introduce Reverend Dennis Reynolds. As you know, he's visited our congregation several times. We enjoy his wisdom and wit and his ability to share his authentic self with us. Dennis?
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, Michael, and other folks behind the scenes that you folks don't see as much, but are important each and every week. Joy abides like a river underground, underground, unseen, and yet it is persistently there, and sometimes out of sight, sometimes out of mind. On the morning that I sat down to complete this message to you, I was missing a whole lot. One of the greatest joys of my life, my grandson Jasper. You see, on the 19th of November, after 6 months in the United States, much of it in a small, tiny house on our property, he and his parents returned to their home in Cape Town, South Africa. By the way, Cape Town is literally on the opposite side of the globe. We're up here and Cape Town is down there. So Jasper could not be any further away. My daughter Lindsay and her partner Frank are there, and right now my youngest son Nick and his fiancée are also in Cape Town. And his fiancée Allison, they're in Cape Town, and I miss those grown-ups, but I miss the wee baby most of all. I miss that little scamp so very much. Yet in the midst of missing him, my morning began with joy. When I reached over to check on the time on my cell phone, which doubles as my bedside alarm clock, I saw his dad had posted a video of that sweet boy playing. There he was before I got out of bed. I got to see him pounding his toys on the floor, crawling under the dining room table, which is just the right size table for him to have clearance without bumping his head. Good planning, parents. And cooing and shrieking and smiling. Joy was calling, and I let it in. That song we shared this morning is a special one to me. Kathleen Tracy, the songwriter, is also a friend from UU Summer Camp. I got to sing that song with her when she served as choir director at that camp. Suzanne and I have been going to camp at Seebeck for 25 years. We met there. Suzanne's been going off and on since she was 11 years old, which was many decades ago. Before camp that particular summer, I had heard bits of the song from Suzanne's sister Peggy. For a number of years, Peggy served as the registrar for Elliott Institute, the UU entity that sponsors and organizes summer camps and a winter retreat at Seebeck, and for a time, gatherings at a retreat center in eastern British Columbia. By the way, I recommend Elliott UU camps highly. You can check it out at elliotinstitute.org. I had to throw in that commercial. That year, both Peggy and Kathleen had been at the earlier camp at the BC Retreat Center, and Peggy had learned the song and would joyfully sing the chorus to us. Just remember to let your bucket down. Joy is calling, let it in. In the months leading up to that summer, Peggy had not been able very often to fully let joy into her life. Her beloved spouse and partner, Jim, had died nearly 2 years earlier, and she was bereft and deeply wounded by his passing. Her pain at his loss persisted. Their love story had been a tumultuous one. They had been together as young adults, but the relationship had unraveled back then, and they each had entered in time new relationships. And for many years, the joy they had shared was but a memory. Decades later, after each had gotten on with their lives and careers and had children, etc., they reconnected. By then, each of their marriages had ended in divorce, and they tentatively at first began the process of falling in love all over again. I had the joy of spending a goodly amount of time with them during their years together. Those were joyful times. Family holidays were usually at Peggy and Jim's, first in their home in Denver, and later at the sweet place they bought not far from Seebeck on the Puget Sound. They were both big-time foodies and terrific hosts. They also would come to Eugene to visit Suzanne and I. At their home and in our house, Peggy and Suzanne would take on quilt projects while Jim and I did guy stuff. We went fishing or took on a project like new garden beds in his yard or new ceiling fan at our house. We also attended camp each summer together at Seebeck. Jim became a kind of extra brother for me. His politics, though, were very different from mine. Peggy described Jim and I as the right and left hand of American manhood. One summer, Jim left camp early because he was feeling ill. In the weeks to follow, he was diagnosed with a terminal form of lung cancer. It was, as is the case in such situations, a very difficult year. Peggy and Jim and all of us who loved them soldiered on. We visited often, and I traveled all the way to Pullman with Jim for the Oregon-Washington State football game. He was a hardcore Cougar fan. The Christmas and Thanksgiving feasts were, as usual, awesome. At his request, Peggy got Jim a Labrador puppy he named Sadie. The pupster, as he called her, brought him much joy. When he was feeling strong enough, he would throw tennis balls for her in the yard. When he was debilitated, first by chemotherapy and later by the ravages of the disease, Sadie would be with him hour after hour, laying on him when she was a pup, and later spending hours on or near his bed. When Jim died, Peggy moved through her life as though under a dark gray cloud. We still gathered for meals, and she made some amazing quilts, but joy was a very infrequent visitor in her life. Then, through the healing boon of the passage of time and her own positive spirit, the clouds began to clear, and one could see joy returning for Peggy. It had been there, calling, yet for a time, she was not yet ready to let it in. Finally, that summer, with that song, she was able at last to let her bucket down, to gather up the joy that was with her all around, and to fully let it in. The months of 2020 had been a time of great mourning and loss for all of us. I've often felt pain like an arrow. Since spring, our joy has been diminished by that cloud of COVID. There have been so many losses. The last time we were able to worship and sing together was back in March. There was no summer camp in person at Seebeck this year. There are no fans in the stadiums for football games. Feasts with family and friends have either been abandoned or when they occur, there's a shadow of fear. We lost the ability to communicate with many of our neighbors as the risk of infection created a climate of fear that some have faced with defiance while others self-isolated. There is so much suffering and so many have died. We're up to 280,000 deaths in the United States. Globally, nearly 65 million people have been identified as having the disease, and over 1.5 million have died. We're approaching 1,000 deaths here in Oregon, and 20 people have died of the virus in Douglas County. My own son Nick and his fiancée Allison tested positive for the virus. I'm pleased to report that their symptoms were mild and they will soon be out of quarantine. It was scary, though, to hear their test results. This holiday season is a psycho-spiritually challenging time, especially for those for whom the seasonal gray skies can bring on the depressive symptoms of seasonal affect disorder, aptly called SAD. This year, We are all under a gray cloud, struggling sometimes to find anything to be joyous about, yet a lifetime of experience and the wisdom that has been passed down through the ages reminds me that even when I find it difficult to see, even when it seems clouded and hidden by clouds, joy abides. Joy abides like a river underground, waiting for you to let your bucket down. Joy is calling. So how might we find ways to answer its calls and let it in? For me, that begins with acknowledging and lifting up the joy that has emerged in the midst of the pandemic. My sweet grandson Jasper was born in a hospital that had implemented COVID procedures. And the pandemic has been the central crisis of the world his entire lifetime. And yet none can deny that he is a great joy to all who encounter him. While it's true, we're not all gifted with that kind of joy. We can all let our bucket down and perhaps offer a bucket of relief to others in so doing. Sometimes that relief can simply be an acknowledgement, a reaching out to say, "Are you okay?" Meghan Markle, the American actress now known globally as the Duchess of Sussex, in a recent New York Times essay titled "The Losses We Share," suggests that perhaps the path to healing begins with 3 simple words. Are you okay? In her essay, she lifts up the often silently endured pain and grief she felt when she had a miscarriage during her second pregnancy. Such grief, though seldom shared, can be very painful. I know from my own experience how much it hurts. When my former wife had a miscarriage, we grieved for what we lost, a joy we had only imagined. The Duchess wrote, "This year, scared, divided, and perhaps struggling to find anything to be grateful for, let us commit to asking others, are you okay? As much as we disagree, are physically distanced as we may be, the truth is that we are more connected than ever because all of us have individually and collectively endured this year. We are adjusting to a new normal where faces are concealed by masks, but it's forcing us to look into one another's eyes. Sometimes filled with warmth, other times with tears. For the first time in a long time as human beings, we are really seeing one another. Are you okay? We will be. So let's make one of the first steps towards reclaiming joy be to reach out to others, to check in and to let folks know we care. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been making calls to isolated members of the Eugene congregations, and those calls have brought joy to me and to their recipients. As David White advised us in our reading, to feel a full and untrampled joy is to become fully generous. To allow ourselves to be joyful is to have walked through the doorway of fear. The dropping away of the anxious, worried self felt like a thankful death itself, a disappearance, a giving away overheard in the laughter of friendship. The vulnerability of happiness felt suddenly as a strength, a solace and a source, the claiming of our place in the living conversation. Our place in the living conversation. That conversation can also go beyond what we experience with other people towards being part of what White called the sheer privilege of being in the presence of the ocean, the sense of having danced to the music in the rain under the sky. My relationship with the natural world offers to me a pathway towards much more joy. Just being and doing things outside seeds that joy. I have the good fortune this season to be living in our new home. We moved in February, but did not get final occupancy until April. It has, as yet, a largely undeveloped yard. It means that I have the great joy to begin to change that. And the joy happens not just because of the changes I make, but because of the future beauty I can imagine. The 3 new hydrangeas that I planted last week don't look like very much right now, but I can imagine how glorious they will be by summer. And though I cannot see the white and blue and magenta blossoms the nurseryman described, I can imagine them. Imagination is another bucket that can help us to access joy. Imagination and story. For stories can fill us with joy, both true stories of previous joys and joy-filled fictional stories. The Christmas season is a season filled with stories. Most every family has some story of a special gift or goofy experience from the season. Even when nothing specific comes to mind, my heart warms when I recall the many joyous extended family gatherings I have been, in healthier parts, been part of. I have little doubt that my imagination, though, may have altered the facts of what really happened at those gatherings. Uncle Walt's sometimes obnoxious behavior seldom gets as much attention in my memory and my reconstructed memory of family history as does how much I loved him and how much he loved me. Literature and the media also offer us lots of joy-filled stories and fantasy characters. And begins perhaps with Dickens' Christmas Carol, that classic account of how Ebenezer Scrooge rediscovers the joys of the holiday season. Then, of course, there is Santa Claus with all his elves and reindeer and magic abilities. That myth has brought much joy to generations of children. We also have Frosty the Snowman, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Little Drummer Boy, etc., etc. And for grown-ups, we have the gift of the Magi. In some households, the viewing of the 1980s film A Christmas Story is an annual nostalgic reminder of how the heartache, of both the heartache and the joy of the holiday season. At my house, we watch It's a Wonderful Life every holiday season, and we see it again and again, year after year, how George Bailey re-engages with his joy. I have to confess, this movie is not one of my favorites, but the joy it brings to Suzanne makes me feel joyous. Joy abides. Then we have the story that gives the season its name, the story of the birth of the infant who will become known as the Christ. It's that story that leads us to celebrate the Christ Mass, Christmas. That story, some of our neighbors remind us, is the reason for the season, or at least for its name. This miraculous story, whether one believes it to be literally true or not, is a source of great joy. What may or may not have happened in Bethlehem on a cold winter night is debated even between the various accounts in the Christian Gospels. And variations of the Nativity story have been woven into the tale over time. The central, indisputable message of the story is about the joy that a birth of new possibility can bring. In this audacious story, we hear of how a humbly born infant can bring kings and shepherds to their knees with overwhelming joy. This is a story filled with abundant hope and joy for what might be. I'd like to close this morning with the words of the Unitarian religious educator, Sophia Foss. For so the children come, and so they have been coming. Always the same way they come, born of the seed of a man and a woman. No angels herald their beginnings. No prophets predict their future courses. No wise men can see a star to show where to find the babe that will save humankind. Yet each night a child is born is a holy night. Sitting beside our children's cribs, we feel glory in the sight of new life beginning. We ask, where and how will this new life end? Or will it ever end? Each night a child is born is a holy night, a time for singing, a time for wondering, a time for worshiping. I invite you to join in the singing of our closing hymn, Joy to the World. Yet another poet, Steve Abbott, offers us the words of our benediction.
The time has come. We must defend our dream, proclaim that this is what is best in us.
Where would we be without our variant love?
The world would shine. Excuse me, let me start this. The word would shine. No, it's going to shrivel.
It's going to shrivel, so we're going to redo that.
Okay, all right. That's
Okay,
fine.
take two.
Okay.
Yet another poet, Steve Abbott, offers us the following words of benediction.
The time has come. We must defend our dream, proclaim this is what is best in us.
Where would we be without our variant love?
The world would shrivel, die.
Without surprise, boredom would be the sole master of space.
And summer joys would perish under constant joy.
Let us keep surprise and joy alive. Amen and blessed be.